The revelation came through the most unexpected source, a pastor who had spent 30 years teaching about the rapture, only to discover he might not be ready for it himself. But what Jesus showed me about who's actually rapture ready will shock you more than anything you've ever heard about the end times. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the test Jesus gave me has nothing to do with what most Christians think determines rapture readiness. Pastor David Thornton had built his entire ministry around eschatology. His church, Maranatha Bible Fellowship, was known throughout the region for its detailed prophecy conferences, its precise timeline charts of end times events, and its passionate teaching about the imminent return of Christ. For 3 decades, Pastor Thornton had preached with absolute certainty about the rapture, the tribulation, and the signs of the times. That's why the phone call I received from him at 11 p.m. on a cold February night caught me completely off guard. "Jonathan," he said, his voice trembling with something I had never heard from him before, fear. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. After everything I've taught, after all these years of preparing others for the rapture, how do I know if I'm actually ready myself?" I had known Pastor Thornton for over 15 years. I had spoken at his prophecy conferences, had dinner in his home, and had always considered him one of the most knowledgeable and prepared believers I knew when it came to end times events. His question stunned me. "David, what's brought this on?" I asked. "You've been teaching about rapture readiness for decades. If anyone's prepared, surely it's you." "That's just it," he replied, his voice breaking. "I've been so focused on the when and the how of the rapture that I've never really examined the who." Tonight, as I was preparing my sermon on the signs of the times, I felt the Holy Spirit ask me a question that shook me to my core. "David, you know everything about the rapture except whether you're actually ready for it." What Pastor Thornton discovered that night would challenge everything he thought he knew about rapture readiness, but it was nothing compared to what Jesus would reveal to me about the shocking test that actually determines who goes up and who gets left behind. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about Pastor Thornton's question. Here was a man who had devoted his life to studying and teaching about the rapture, yet he was genuinely uncertain about his own readiness. If someone with his knowledge and dedication could have doubts, what did that say about the rest of us? Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention to the believers around me who claimed to be rapture ready. What I discovered was both fascinating and troubling. Many of the most vocal advocates for rapture preparation seemed to focus almost exclusively on prophetic knowledge, doctrinal correctness, and watching for signs, but there was something missing that I couldn't quite identify. That missing element would become the key to understanding Jesus' shocking test for rapture readiness, a test that has nothing to do with prophecy charts or doctrinal positions. 3 months after Pastor Thornton's call, as I was preparing for a speaking engagement about end times preparation, I found myself desperately needing answers that went beyond standard rapture theology. The questions he had raised demanded responses that I couldn't find in any prophecy book or seminary course. That night, alone in my study, surrounded by commentaries on Revelation and charts of prophetic timelines, I found myself on my knees in prayer with an urgency I hadn't felt since my previous encounters with Jesus. "Lord," I whispered, "I'm seeing something troubling in how we approach rapture readiness. People who know everything about prophecy but seem to be missing something essential. I need to know, what does it actually mean to be rapture ready? What's your real test?" The study grew quiet in that familiar way that preceded Jesus' appearances. But this time, instead of his immediate presence, I felt compelled to think about the difference between knowing about the rapture and being ready for it. What happened next would shatter every assumption I had about end times preparation and reveal a test so shocking that it would change how I understood the entire concept of rapture readiness. Suddenly, my study filled with that familiar presence, and Jesus was sitting in the chair across from my desk. But his expression was unlike anything I had seen in our previous encounters, not the gentle teacher or the concerned shepherd, but something that reminded me of his words about separating the sheep from the goats. "Jonathan," he said, his voice carrying both infinite love and absolute authority, "your friend David has stumbled upon the most important question in eschatology, not when the rapture will happen, but who will actually be ready when it does. Tonight, I'm going to give you the test that determines rapture readiness, and I promise you, it will shock you." Before I could respond, my study around us dissolved. We were observing what appeared to be the most comprehensive view of the church I had ever witnessed, not just individual believers, but entire congregations, denominations, and movements, all claiming to be rapture ready. The shocking truth, Jesus explained, is that most of those who think they're rapture ready are not, and many of those who never think about the rapture are more prepared than they realize. The test has nothing to do with prophetic knowledge or doctrinal positions. But before I reveal what Jesus' test actually is, you need to understand why everything the church teaches about rapture readiness might be missing the most crucial element. What I witnessed next revolutionized my understanding of end times preparation. Jesus showed me that there were actually 3 distinct levels of rapture readiness, and that most believers were stuck at the first level while believing they had achieved the third. The first level, Jesus said, is prophetic awareness. These believers know the signs, understand the timelines, and can debate the details of various rapture theories. They think knowledge equals readiness. I watched as this played out in churches across the country. Believers who could recite every verse about the rapture, who attended every prophecy conference, who had memorized the sequence of end times events, but who seemed to be missing something fundamental about what readiness actually meant. These believers, Jesus explained, are like students who have studied for a test, but have never asked what subject they're actually being tested on. The second level would prove even more deceptive. And the third level, well, that's where Jesus' shocking test comes into play. The second level, Jesus continued, is spiritual preparation. These believers focus on personal holiness, regular prayer, Bible study, and maintaining their relationship with me. They think spiritual discipline equals readiness. The vision expanded to show me believers who had dedicated themselves to spiritual growth, who maintained consistent devotional lives, who served faithfully in their churches, and who genuinely loved God. They appeared to be model Christians by every standard the church taught. These believers, Jesus said, are closer to true readiness, but they're still missing the most crucial element of the test. What Jesus revealed next about the third level of rapture readiness would shock me more than anything I had ever learned about the end times. The third level, Jesus said, his voice taking on an intensity that made the air around us seem to vibrate, is what I call kingdom readiness. This is where my actual test is applied, and it has nothing to do with what most believers think determines who goes up and who gets left behind. Jonathan, he continued, the test for rapture readiness is not about prophetic knowledge or even personal holiness. The test is about whether someone has learned to live as a citizen of my kingdom rather than as a citizen of this world. The implications of what he was saying began to dawn on me, but I wasn't prepared for how radically different his test would be from everything I had been taught about rapture readiness. The specific details of Jesus' test would prove so shocking that they would challenge every assumption about who's actually ready for the rapture. The shocking truth, Jesus explained, is that rapture readiness is not determined by what you know about the future, but by how you live in the present. It's not about your theology, it's about your priorities. It's not about your spiritual disciplines, it's about your spiritual allegiances. As the vision continued, I began to see believers who had all the right knowledge and all the right practices, but whose hearts were still anchored to this world rather than oriented toward his kingdom. They were spiritually active but not kingdom ready. The test, Jesus said, is simple but shocking. Are you living as though my kingdom is your true home, or are you living as though this world is your true home with heaven as a nice addition? But the most shocking part of Jesus' test wasn't the question itself. It was how he determined the answer. I watched as Jesus applied this test to believer after believer, and the results were stunning. Pastors who preached about the rapture but whose hearts were consumed with building earthly ministries, prophecy teachers who knew every detail about the end times but were devastated by stock market losses, church members who sang about heaven but lived as though this world was all that mattered. The test reveals itself. Jesus explained, in what breaks your heart, what consumes your thoughts, what drives your decisions, and what you're unwilling to lose. Tomorrow night, Jesus would show me the specific indicators he uses to determine kingdom readiness and why most believers who think they're rapture ready would fail his test. As the vision began to fade and my study gradually reappeared around us, Jesus leaned forward with an expression of both love and urgent concern. Jonathan, he said, What I'm about to show you over the next 2 nights will challenge everything the church teaches about rapture readiness. The test I use has nothing to do with prophetic knowledge, doctrinal positions, or even spiritual disciplines. Tomorrow night, he continued, I'll show you the specific indicators that reveal whether someone is truly kingdom ready or just religiously prepared, and I warn you the results will shock you. But before he left, Jesus gave me a preview that would haunt me until our next encounter. Tell your friend David, Jesus said as his presence began to fade, that his question reveals he's closer to true readiness than he realizes. The believers who never question their readiness are usually the ones who aren't ready at all. As his presence faded completely, his final words burned themselves into my consciousness. The test for rapture readiness is not about being prepared to leave this world, it's about whether you've already left it in your heart. What Jesus would reveal the next night about the specific indicators of kingdom readiness would prove so shocking that it would revolutionize my understanding of who's actually going up and who's getting left behind. And then I was alone in my study, but everything had changed. The comfortable assumptions about rapture readiness lay in ruins around me. According to Jesus, the test had nothing to do with prophetic knowledge or spiritual disciplines. It was about something far more fundamental and far more challenging. Pastor Thornton's question had opened a door to the most important revelation about end times preparation I had ever received. But what Jesus had shown me so far was just the beginning. The real shock would come when he revealed the specific indicators he uses to determine who's actually ready for the rapture. And those indicators, as you'll discover, have nothing to do with what most Christians think determines rapture readiness. The second night brought revelations that shattered every assumption I had about what actually determines rapture readiness. After Jesus revealed that his test focused on kingdom citizenship rather than prophetic knowledge, I couldn't stop thinking about how many believers might be completely unprepared for a test they didn't even know they were taking. But what Jesus showed me about the specific indicators he uses to determine readiness would prove more shocking than anything I could have imagined. As instructed, I returned to my study the following evening, but this time I felt a weight of anticipation unlike anything I had experienced in my previous encounters with Jesus. The question of rapture readiness suddenly felt less academic and more personal than ever before. The familiar presence filled my study, and Jesus appeared in the same chair, but his expression was more serious than I had ever seen. There was something in his eyes that reminded me of his words about the narrow gate and the few who find it. Jonathan, he said, his voice carrying both compassion and unwavering truth, tonight I'm going to show you the specific indicators I use to determine who is truly rapture ready. These indicators have nothing to do with what the church teaches about end times preparation, and they will shock you because they reveal that many who think they're ready are not, while others who never consider their readiness are more prepared than they realize. The first indicator would immediately challenge everything I thought I knew about rapture readiness. Before I could respond, my study dissolved around us. We were observing what appeared to be the most intimate view of believers' hearts I had ever witnessed. Not their external religious activities, but their internal priorities, fears, and true allegiances. The first indicator, Jesus said, is what I call the attachment test. I look at what someone cannot bear to lose, what they're unwilling to sacrifice, and what they cling to most tightly. True kingdom citizens hold everything in this world with open hands. What I witnessed next was both revealing and disturbing. Jesus showed me believers who claimed to be rapture ready but whose hearts were completely entangled with earthly possessions, relationships, and achievements. They spoke of longing for heaven while desperately clinging to earth. But the specific examples Jesus showed me would prove even more shocking than the principle itself. I watched as Jesus examined the heart of a prophecy teacher who knew every detail about the rapture but was party to. Devastated when his retirement account lost value. His knowledge was vast, but his treasure was clearly stored on earth rather than in heaven. This man teaches others about eternal rewards, Jesus explained, but his heart breaks over temporal losses. He's prepared for the rapture intellectually but not emotionally or spiritually. The vision shifted to show me a pastor's wife who led Bible studies on end times events but was consumed with anxiety about her children's college prospects and her family's social status. She could recite verses about not loving the world, but her heart was completely invested in worldly success. The second indicator would prove even more convicting. The second indicator, Jesus continued, is what I call the priority test. I examine what consumes someone's thoughts, drives their decisions, and motivates their actions. Kingdom citizens think like kingdom citizens, not like citizens of this world who happen to believe in heaven. I watched as this test revealed the true heart condition of believer after believer. Church members who spent hours studying prophecy but whose daily decisions were driven entirely by earthly concerns. Christians who sang about the rapture on Sunday but lived Monday through Saturday as though this world was their permanent home. One example Jesus showed me was particularly shocking. Look at this elder, Jesus said, directing my attention to a man I recognized as a leader in a prominent evangelical church. He teaches a Sunday school class on the book of Revelation and serves on the missions committee. By every external measure, he appears to be a mature, rapture-ready believer. But as Jesus revealed the man's heart, I saw someone whose thoughts were consumed with business success, whose decisions were driven by financial gain, and whose identity was completely wrapped up in earthly achievements. His knowledge of prophecy was extensive, but his heart was anchored to this world. He knows about the rapture, Jesus explained, but he's not ready for it because he's never transferred his citizenship from earth to heaven. He's a tourist in my kingdom, not a resident. The third indicator would prove to be the most shocking of all. The third indicator, Jesus said, his voice taking on an intensity that made the spiritual atmosphere around us seem to vibrate, is what I call the suffering test. I look at how someone responds to loss, disappointment, and hardship. Kingdom citizens understand that suffering in this world is expected, not exceptional. What Jesus showed me next challenged everything I thought I knew about spiritual maturity and rapture readiness. I watched as believers who appeared strong and prepared crumbled when faced with difficulties, revealing that their hope was built on earthly comfort rather than heavenly promises. The specific example that followed would haunt me for months. Observe this couple, Jesus said, showing me a husband and wife who were known in their church for their prophecy knowledge and their teaching about the blessed hope of the rapture. They've attended every prophecy conference, read every book about the end times, and can debate the finest points of rapture theology. But when their adult son was diagnosed with a serious illness, their response revealed the true condition of their hearts. Instead of demonstrating the peace and hope that should characterize kingdom citizens, they were consumed with bitterness, anger, and despair. Their reaction to suffering, Jesus explained, reveals that their hope was not actually in me or in the eternal perspective that true rapture readiness requires. They were prepared for a rapture that would rescue them from difficulty, not for a kingdom that gives meaning to difficulty. But Jesus wasn't finished revealing the shocking indicators of true readiness. The fourth indicator, Jesus continued, is what I call the mission test. I examine whether someone lives with the urgency and purpose that comes from truly believing in my imminent return. Kingdom citizens don't just wait for the rapture, they work until it happens. The vision expanded to show me believers who claimed to believe in the imminent rapture, but lived with no sense of urgency about reaching the many lost, serving the needy, or advancing God's kingdom. Their eschatology was theoretical rather than practical. One particular case Jesus showed me was especially convicting. I watched a man who had written books about the rapture and spoke at prophecy conferences, but whose personal life showed no evidence of someone who actually believed Jesus could return at any moment. He made long-term earthly plans without considering eternal implications, pursued personal comfort over kingdom service, and showed no urgency about sharing the gospel with his unsaved neighbors. He teaches about my return, Jesus said, but he doesn't live as though he believes it. His calendar, his priorities, and his choices reveal that he's planning for decades on earth, not preparing for eternity in heaven. The fifth and final indicator would prove to be the most shocking revelation of all. The fifth indicator, Jesus said, his voice now carrying the weight of eternal judgment, is what I call the love test. I examine whether someone has learned to love what I love and hate what I hate. Kingdom citizens share my heart, not just my theology. What Jesus revealed through this final indicator was the most convicting truth I had ever encountered about rapture readiness. I watched as believers who had all the right knowledge and all the right practices were revealed to have hearts that were fundamentally misaligned with God's heart. The specific example Jesus showed me would challenge everything I thought I knew about spiritual maturity. Look at this deacon, Jesus said, showing me a man who was respected in his church for his biblical knowledge and his teaching on end times events. He can explain every aspect of the rapture and the tribulation. He leads a Bible study on prophecy and is considered one of the most prepared believers in his congregation. But as Jesus revealed the man's heart, I saw someone who was indifferent to the suffering of others, unmoved by injustice, and unconcerned about the lost. He loved the idea of being rescued from this world, but he didn't love the people in this world that God wanted to rescue. He wants to escape this world. Jesus explained, but he doesn't share my heart for this world. He's excited about the rapture for selfish reasons, not kingdom reasons. He wants to be taken up, but he doesn't want to be sent out. As the vision continued, the shocking truth about rapture readiness became crystal clear. The stunning reality, Jesus said, is that true rapture. Readiness is not about being prepared to leave this world, it's about having already left it in your heart while remaining engaged with it for my purposes. I watched as Jesus applied these 5 indicators to believer after believer, and the results were devastating. Pastors who preached about the rapture but failed the attachment test, prophecy teachers who failed the priority test, church leaders who failed the suffering test, Bible study leaders who failed the mission test, deacons and elders who failed the love test. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. The believers who are truly rapture ready, Jesus explained, are often those who never think about their readiness because they're too busy living as kingdom citizens. They've transferred their allegiance from earth to heaven, and it shows in every aspect of their lives. As the vision began to fade and my study gradually reappeared around us, Jesus leaned forward with an expression that mixed infinite love with urgent warning. Jonathan, he said, what you've seen tonight reveals why the rapture will be the greatest shock in human history, not because of when it happens, but because of who goes and who doesn't. Tomorrow night, Jesus would reveal the most shocking truth of all, how believers could know with certainty whether they would pass his test. Tomorrow night, he continued, I'll show you how any believer can evaluate their own readiness using these indicators, and what they can do if they discover they're not as prepared as they thought. As his presence began to fade, his final words burned themselves into my consciousness. Tell them that rapture readiness is not about knowing when I'm coming, it's about being ready whenever I come. And readiness is not about what they know, it's about how they live. The final night would bring the most practical and challenging revelation about how to become truly rapture ready. And then I was alone in my study, but everything had changed. The 5 indicators Jesus had revealed attachment, priorities, response to suffering, mission urgency, and love alignment created a test that most believers claiming to be rapture ready would likely fail. The shocking truth was becoming clear. Rapture readiness had nothing to do with prophetic knowledge and everything to do with kingdom citizenship. And according to Jesus' indicators, many who thought they were ready were not, while others who never considered their readiness might be more prepared than they realized. But the most important question remained: how could believers know with certainty whether they would pass Jesus' test? That answer would come on the final night. The 3rd night brought the most life-changing revelation about rapture readiness I had ever received. After Jesus revealed his 5 indicators for determining true kingdom citizenship, I spent the entire day examining my own heart and life against his shocking test. What I discovered about myself and what he would reveal about how any believer could know their true readiness would transform my understanding of the rapture forever. But nothing could have prepared me for the most shocking truth Jesus would reveal about who actually goes up and who gets left behind. As I entered my study that final evening, I felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation unlike anything I had experienced in my previous encounters with Jesus. The weight of his 5 indicators, attachment, priorities, response to suffering, mission urgency, and love alignment had been pressing on my heart all day. The familiar presence filled the room, and Jesus appeared with an expression that combined infinite compassion with absolute truth. But there was something different about his demeanor tonight, a sense of urgency that reminded me of his words about working while it is still day. Jonathan, he said, his voice carrying both tender love and holy authority, tonight I'm going to give you the most important revelation about rapture readiness you will ever receive. I'm going to show you how any believer can know with certainty whether they're truly ready, and I'm going to reveal the shocking truth about who actually goes up when the rapture occurs. What Jesus revealed first would challenge the most fundamental assumptions about salvation and readiness. Before I could respond, my study dissolved around us. But this time, instead of observing other believers, we were examining my own heart against the 5 indicators Jesus had revealed. The experience was both terrifying and liberating. The first step to true readiness, Jesus said, is honest self-examination using my indicators rather than human standards. Most believers evaluate their readiness based on what makes them feel secure, rather than what actually makes them ready. As Jesus applied his attachment test to my own life, I was shocked by what he revealed. Despite years of teaching about eternal perspectives, I discovered areas where my heart was still anchored to earthly concerns in ways I had never recognized. The specific areas Jesus revealed in my own life would prove both humbling and transformative. Look at your response when your ministry opportunities are threatened, Jesus said, showing me moments when I had been more concerned about my reputation and platform than about his kingdom purposes. Your knowledge of eternal truths is extensive, but your emotional attachment to earthly success reveals areas where your citizenship is still divided. The examination continued through each of the 5 indicators, and I was stunned to discover how much of my life was still oriented toward this world rather than his kingdom, despite my theological knowledge and ministry experience. But what Jesus showed me next would prove even more shocking. The second step, Jesus continued, is understanding that rapture readiness is not a one-time decision but an ongoing transformation. Kingdom citizenship is not achieved through a prayer or a commitment. It's developed through daily choices to live as a citizen of heaven rather than earth. What Jesus revealed next revolutionized my understanding of how readiness actually develops. I watched as believers who had failed. His indicators began to transform their lives through specific, practical changes that gradually shifted their allegiance from earth to heaven. The transformation process Jesus showed me was both challenging and hopeful. True readiness, Jesus explained, begins when someone recognizes that their current level of preparation is inadequate and commits to the process of transferring their citizenship from earth to heaven. This is not about trying harder, it's about wanting different things. I watched as believers began to evaluate their lives against Jesus' 5 indicators and discovered, like I had, that their readiness was not what they had assumed. But instead of despair, this recognition led to a transformation process that was both practical and profound. The specific steps Jesus outlined for developing true readiness would prove both challenging and achievable. The attachment test, Jesus said, is passed by gradually loosening your grip on earthly things and tightening your grip on eternal things. This happens through deliberate choices to hold everything in this world with open hands. He showed me believers who began to practice what he called kingdom detachment, making decisions based on eternal rather than temporal considerations, finding their identity in their relationship with him rather than in earthly achievements, and learning to hold their possessions, relationships, and plans loosely. The priority test, Jesus continued, is passed by aligning your daily choices with kingdom values rather than worldly values. This means asking, what would a citizen of heaven do in every situation? The practical applications Jesus showed me were both specific and transformative. I watched as believers began to restructure their schedules, their finances, their relationships, and their goals around kingdom priorities rather than earthly success. They didn't withdraw from the world, but they engaged with it as ambassadors rather than citizens. The suffering test, Jesus explained, is passed by learning to view hardship through the lens of eternity rather than the lens of earthly comfort. Kingdom citizens understand that suffering is not a problem to be solved, but a tool to be used for spiritual growth. The vision showed me believers who had learned to respond to difficulties with the peace and hope that comes from an eternal perspective, using their trials as opportunities to demonstrate kingdom values rather than as reasons to question God's goodness. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. The mission test, Jesus said, is passed by living with the urgency that comes from truly believing in my imminent return. This means making choices based on eternal impact rather than earthly comfort. I watched as believers began to restructure their lives around kingdom purposes, sharing the gospel with urgency, serving others sacrificially, and using their resources for eternal rather than temporal goals. The love test, Jesus continued, is passed by learning to love what I love and hate what I hate. This means developing my heart for the lost, the suffering, and the marginalized. As Jesus explained how these tests could be passed, the most shocking truth about the rapture began to emerge. Now, Jesus said, his voice taking on an intensity that made the spiritual atmosphere around us seem to vibrate with eternal significance, I'm going to reveal the shocking truth about who actually goes up in the rapture. What Jesus revealed next would challenge everything I thought I knew about salvation, readiness, and the rapture itself. The shocking truth, Jesus said, is that the rapture is not about rescuing believers from this world. It's about taking kingdom citizens to their true home. The question is not whether someone has prayed a prayer or joined a church, but whether they have truly transferred their citizenship from earth to heaven. The implications of what Jesus was revealing were staggering. Many who think they're saved and ready, Jesus explained, are actually citizens of this world who happen to believe in heaven. They want the benefits of salvation without the transformation of citizenship. They want to be rescued from hell without being changed for heaven. I watched as Jesus applied his test to countless believers who had assumed their salvation guaranteed their rapture readiness, only to discover that their hearts were still anchored to this world rather than oriented toward his kingdom. But the most shocking revelation was about to come. The rapture, Jesus said, will reveal the difference between those who are saved and those who are ready. Salvation is about forgiveness, readiness is about transformation. Many who are saved are not ready because they've never learned to live as citizens of my kingdom. The implications were staggering. Jesus was revealing that there would be saved believers who would not be taken in the rapture because they had never developed the kingdom citizenship that true readiness required. As the vision reached its climax, Jesus revealed the most important truth of all. But here is the hope, Jesus said, his expression filling with infinite love and grace. Right now, at this moment, any believer can begin the process of developing true kingdom citizenship. The test is not about perfection, it's about direction. It's not about having arrived, it's about being on the journey. As the vision began to fade and my study gradually reappeared around us, Jesus leaned forward with an expression of both urgent love and eternal hope. Jonathan, he said, the shocking truth about rapture, readiness is not meant to create fear, it's meant to create transformation. Any believer who recognizes their need for greater kingdom citizenship can begin developing it today. Jesus' final words would provide both challenge and hope for every believer. The question, Jesus continued, is not whether someone is perfectly ready, it's whether they're moving toward readiness or away from it. The rapture will take those whose hearts are oriented toward my kingdom, even if they're still growing in that orientation. As his presence began to intensify rather than fade, I realized this wasn't just information he was sharing, it was an invitation he was extending to every believer willing to examine their true readiness. Right now, Jesus said, any believer can begin the journey from religious citizenship to kingdom citizenship. They can start living as citizens of heaven rather than citizens of earth who happen to believe in heaven. In that moment, the full weight of Jesus' revelation settled on my heart. The shocking truth about rapture readiness, Jesus said as his presence filled my study with transforming light, is that it's not about when I'm coming, it's about whether you're ready whenever I come. And readiness is not about what you know, it's about how you live. As his presence finally began to fade, his final words burned themselves into my consciousness. Tell them that the rapture will be the greatest shock in human history, not because of when it happens, but because of who goes and who doesn't. Tell them that salvation guarantees heaven, but only kingdom citizenship guarantees rapture readiness. And tell them that the choice to develop that citizenship is available to every believer right now. The shocking truth Jesus revealed would change everything about how I understood rapture readiness. For months now, this shocking revelation has revolutionized my understanding of end times preparation. The test for rapture readiness has nothing to do with prophetic knowledge, doctrinal positions, or even spiritual disciplines. It's about whether someone has learned to live as a citizen of God's kingdom rather than as a citizen of this world. The 5 indicators Jesus has revealed: attachment, priorities, response to suffering, mission urgency, and love alignment create a test that reveals the true condition of every believer's heart. And according to Jesus, many who think they're ready are not, while others who never consider their readiness might be more prepared than they realize. But the most shocking truth is that rapture readiness is not about perfection, it's about direction. It's not about having arrived at complete kingdom citizenship, it's about being on the journey toward it. Any believer who recognizes their need for greater readiness can begin developing it today through the practical steps Jesus outlined. The shocking truth about who goes up in the rapture is not meant to create fear, it's meant to create transformation. And that transformation is available to every believer willing to examine their heart against Jesus' indicators and commit to the process of transferring their citizenship from earth to heaven. Pastor Thornton's question had opened the door to the most important revelation about rapture readiness any of us could receive. And now, that revelation is available to every believer willing to face the shocking truth about their own readiness.